Yeah, welcome to today's session, today's mastermind. One more time, we have an exciting group on here on Zoom, and it's now time to dive into a topic that we feel so deeply about at the ARC, which you can easily imagine, and that is the topic of transformative listening. So let me quickly open up the presentation so we can start. And here we go. So I hope everything can see this well, and hello to you all. Yeah, let's get started. Now, I think we've all heard of these kind of transformations that can happen to people when, the shy suddenly become courageous, when the clueless suddenly become creative, and maybe when the agitated suddenly turn into more peaceful people. And that just within a conversation where everything that's happening is that somebody listens to you in a way that you start to discover parts about yourself that maybe you haven't seen before. Today is all about that. Today is how do we listen in a way that we can actually transform, that we can actually support others in their growth. And as always, we are going to be having two parts. One is the theory, where we're going to be sharing the 4 levels of listening. And one is a coaching exercise, where we're going to be checking how we can improve our listening skills on our desired level. And let's hop right into it. And before we get started, just like in case you don't know, the ARC, we're this international mastermind of purpose-driven individuals who really seek to build something in their lives that inspires themselves and others. So we do international leadership boot camps and coaching programs, as well as we entertain a really, really thrilling community of founders, entrepreneurs, people who really want to push the envelope and be better leaders, better people, and build better companies as a result of that. So if that's something you're curious about, you're so invited. You can sign up for our newsletter where we have regular self-coaching exercises, and you can also schedule a coffee chat with us. So if that's something you're curious about, we're going to be somebody from the team talking with you about what is it that you actually want. Oh, and I have a dog in the background in case you're hearing that. What is it that you actually want and how we can support you. Now, let's dive into the topic. If you dissect listening, really you will find that is the skill to observe and to interpret internally what we are observing in order to prepare what feels for us an adequate response. So adequate, let's don't get confused. Maybe anger is anger adequate, or let's say our system maybe thinks that, right? Maybe being very calm is adequate. By adequate, I don't mean societally adequate. I mean what is adequate for our system. And also, it's probably one of the most underrated skills in management, because really what listening does, it empowers you to make the right move at the right time. And think about what that means for your teams, for companies, for organizations, for politicians. That's really what leadership is about. Now, we have Googled this quite a bit. And really, when you're Googling like listening tips, what you'll find is kitchen psychology, really. Like, I'm going to give you the ones that we like the most. For instance, sitting and paying attention. Making eye contact and nodding occasionally. What a great tip. Or using I messages rather than you messages. Like, whoa, don't talk about always the other person, talk about yourself. Okay. And this one I love the most. It was directly copy pasted from Harvard Business Review. Not talking when others are speaking. Applause to that. So yeah, given all that stuff and all of that, maybe not exactly great advice, we thought let's dive into models and theories that actually help us to get to that really empowering and generative and transformative level of listening. And the one model we like most is the 4 levels of listening by Otto Scharmer. And if you know this model, stay with us anyways, because we are actually giving you a self-coaching exercise where you can apply the Otto Scharmer model to your own world, to your own thinking, to your own job, if you want. Now, this guy can, by the way, Otto Scharmer, just before, who is this? Yeah, he's working at MIT. He's a teacher there. And he actually comes from Germany, from a really cool biodynamic farm. So, but yeah, this guy is into research. He's also the founder of the Presencing Institute, and he's really well renowned for, yeah, having a very specific view on communication, team and group processes. And for me, he's produced a lot of really cool theory. Now, let's go on. He distinguishes between 4 types. The first one is downloading. At this level of listening, it's really all about me. And it's kind of like the most common one. And really, what happens is that we are listening and simultaneously classifying the information that comes in. And we are sort of like absorbing it into our existing preconception. So it's like we are pulling out the drawers that we have in our mind and trying to figure out like which drawer the information we just received fits in. Number 2, we're really like listening for overlap between what is it that we know and what we are perceiving, right? So if something doesn't overlap, we're going to be like, yeah, but that doesn't sound right. Or like, we're going to experience resistance. And I like to say, as a downloader, you really want to be challenged. You want to be confirmed, inspired, or maybe you're just looking for a mistake. But really, you are probably listening from a more triggered state, and the trigger being that things need to be the way you know them, right? It's like you're listening from your habits. Strictly speaking, it's pretty self-serving, strictly speaking, right? And does not always actually keep what it promises, namely listening, right? And why do we are all downloaders to a certain extent, right? It's because not being confirmed means stress to our system, right? It's like, oh, there's something new. So, and even this tiny micro shock, like super micro as it may be, is enough to at times, throw us into the urge to interrupt or just ask a leading question so that our system can be calmed down again. So I'm going to give you some examples, which hopefully makes it clearer for you. Imagine you're sitting in this conversation and someone says something with you and you really have this urge to comment, right? It's because like, you don't like what you're hearing, or you have to really respond, like some ventile in your system has to be created. Imagine you're in another meeting and someone starts in a brainstorming meeting and somebody starts the timer and there's this like, and it was from my own experience, like this, for me, unbearable vacuum of silence. You're like, oh, we have to solve the problem. And so just because you can't stand silence and you're triggered by the silence, you're throwing in like a second level quality idea, like a low quality idea. Or you're just like questioning the whole process, like, this wasn't a good idea. Anyways, let's just do something else, right? Or I like this one, when after a conversation, you feel like you really have to give feedback to someone and maybe think lesser of the person if they don't take it. If they're like, no, I don't need your feedback. And I was like, you're like, you're just dumb, you're an idiot, or you are impolite. So these are ways of downloading. And I think Stephen Covey put this so beautifully. He said, the biggest problem with communication is we don't listen to understand, we listen to reply. So yeah, I think this is summed up beautifully. Now let's go to the second level of listening. This is where the real listening actually starts. And this is what I like to call this factual listening, where it's all about the data, not about me nor them, right? So we're trying to figure out, is the data actually correct? So we're looking for facts that are confirming or disconfirming our reality, but we are open to any outcome, right? So we don't have to be confirmed. And I like to say our hunger to be right is not that much of an issue as it might be at the downloading level. I think the ideal scientists is a nice example. Scientists are, if they're doing it well, actually looking for disproof of their theory because they know all theory is correct until proven wrong. And I know some of you might say, oh, the world would just be so much better if that was the listening level at which we would just all operate. All our problems would be solved because it would be clear like climate change is really a thing and we would just like start to behave differently potentially. But yeah, we know that life isn't like that. Like most communication happens on paraverbal and nonverbal level. So it is in theory a great thing to only listen to the facts, but like a great thing for problem solving. But it really is not enough to steer through this crazy complexity of everyday human communication. Now, here too, I want to give some examples. A police detective inquiring two suspects about who stole the book from the library, right? It's like they don't care which one it was, they just want to get it right. A doctor diagnosing whether your ankle is broken or merely strained. Again, the doctor, that's assumed, doesn't care if it's strained or broken, just wants to find out what's happening. And then I got this one, dad trying to figure out if the baby's crying because it's hungry or needs a diaper change, supposing that dad doesn't care which outcome it is. Maybe it's a bit of a bad example because maybe dad would rather want the baby to be hungry than having to change diapers, but I hope you're getting the heck of it. Now, level number 3, we call this empathic listening, where it's really all about them. Right? So this really means to listen from the point of view of the speaker. This time, it's not so much about me, it's not so much about the fact, it's about what is their experience while talking. So this really requires to silence our inner voices and be entirely with the experience of the other person, right? We also have to postpone judgment in order to truly understand not just the facts, but also the emotional experience the speaker operates from while speaking. Now, I think Bruce Lee put this so well. Empty your mind, be formless, be shapeless like water. You put water in a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water in a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in the teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. And I got this analogy from one of our really cool trainers at the ARC. It's like, when I listen to people, I become water. I sense them, I feel them. I make myself somewhat transparent and be entirely with that person. And that is sort of like the essence of empathic listening. Now, I'm going to give some examples, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about some disclaimers. So examples would be a person who you dearly love shares a story they never shared before, and that makes them feel highly vulnerable. A classic situation where our mirror neurons just go wild and like, wow, and we're so with the person, we feel the person. Why this one? You're robbed in the streets at night. Let's take a tricky one. And next to your purse, you also hand your jacket to the thief because you saw in his eyes that he needs it more than you. Crazy one. Or a more realistic one. A couple therapists listens to 2 people who are answering how each of them has contributed to their marriage being about to fail. Right? I wanted to include one that maybe you have less like rolling eyes. Like, do you have to be Jesus in order to have empathic listening skills? No. Also, I want to make a reference to Oprah Winfrey. I think she's just so good at this. I have the story about her that when she listens to people, she really feels them. And I think that's my personal story, my explanation why she's such a great interviewer and why people open up to her so much. They just feel so heard and so understood. Now, I promise it's going to be a little bit of bonus because it's very easy to see how empathic listening works well when we are listening to a person who we really like. But what about if we're listening to a person who we really don't like, who gives us really negative vibes? So I have made the experience that great empathic listeners have cultivated one or all of the following mindsets. Number 1 is this firm belief that nobody wakes up with the intention to be a bad person. And people choose the best option they're capable of. And this is a bit of a complex thing to wrap our head around. Even somebody who we don't like. They probably didn't wake up this morning saying, today I'm going to be an idiot. But the behavior that they are currently displaying is the best they can probably come up with in their triggered state. Or maybe, and this is level 2, maybe it's not their thing, like it's not them being so limited and whatever. It's because it's a thing for me. You know, it's like, why am I even triggered by their bad vibes? Why does it even affect me? You know, so mindset number 2 would be, if I feel attacked or in any other way negative about this person, I am triggered. So do I want to make this about myself and listen like a downloader, or do I have the inner strength and generosity to postpone my judgment and to find the positive intention behind this, let's say, seemingly bad behavior, which right now I actually fail to see? And number 3, and this is kind of like the more spiritual, fluffy part. So really everything we are on, if we want to become an empathic listener, is a journey to healing, of healing our triggers. So after the conversation, I might ask myself, what needs to heal within me so I can go through such a conversation in a more peaceful state, right? Small example, if you're talking to somebody who you don't like because that person always gets angry, sure, they're not having the intention of being an angry idiot. Or maybe they do to a certain extent, but maybe they find that's cool or important for some reason. And maybe I can empathize with that. Maybe I can empathize with anger is really, with in all their triggered world, the best response they can possibly come up with. Or maybe I have to work on myself, saying, why is anger even such an issue for me? Right? And is that something, what story do I have about anger? And is that something that can be healed? And I'm saying this because depending on how triggered we are at times, these might be tough times to go through, tough thoughts to go through, right? But if done successfully, empathic listening is definitely supposed to be a positive experience for the listener and the speaker. And also, please note that empathic listening is not supposed to be self-torture, right? We wrote here, it doesn't mean you have to become the garbage can for other people's complaints. Like, that's not the point. So it is really finding that soft spot where you feel your triggers enough that you can actually listen, and you're not triggered. It's not self-torture. You can hold space for someone else, right? And yeah, that's a journey. If it's done incredibly, it's wonderful. And if you're like overstretching yourself, or just putting yourself in situations that maybe you are triggered, like, let's have mercy that maybe you don't have to be or should be an empathic listener all of the time. And that brings us to listening style number 4, listening level number 4, generative listening, where it's all about a higher purpose. It's not about me. It's not about the facts. It's not about the facts if it's right or wrong. It's not about them. It's about the potential that is in the room. It's about what this conversation could be followed up with, what this conversation could be a representation of. And we are listening sort of like from the standpoint of the other person's or the situation's potential. It's like, it doesn't matter if they think climate change if they think climate change is a lie, the person I'm talking to. The potential I see in this conversation is that we really have an opportunity to get like people who are really thinking climate change is a lie and people who are really thinking climate change isn't a lie, but it's actually really like scientifically based, together and actually create something, right? As a quick example, let's talk about this a little bit more. We listen in a way that you're neither with ourselves, we're not listening to the facts, nor are we with the other person fully, but we're listening to like what is trying to emerge in this conversation. What is this conversation an opportunity for? What can we create as a result of the conversation? And you're somewhat like speaking from the point of view of that thing that can be created. I like to say, imagine there's like a certain value and it's knocking on your door, right? And it's like, please let me in, right? you're trying to be an advocate for that value. Yeah. In other words, you're listening to the elements the person says or does that are representative of this larger value that this person is consciously or subconsciously operating from. This person, or maybe like the situation as a whole. So while the speaker is talking, generative listeners already notice the arrival of something bigger and greater, something that potentially even the speaker fails to see. And that's where the creational part of this type of listening comes. Obviously, we have to say, and we're going to give some examples in a second, but if this view needs to be credible, right? So you need to credibly have faith in that one value that is knocking on the door. Like if you're like, hey, let's go back to this political conversation from the climate change believers and the climate change not believers. and if you credibly have to be convinced that there is an opportunity for them to work together, otherwise you're probably not going to be very persuasive in listening and really holding space for future cooperation, right? But let's actually get into some examples here. So like, let's imagine a famous talent scout that hears the incredible beauty in the voice of a gifted but maybe untrained child. It's like, wow, you have the voice of an old soul, and he sees that potential, and so he can speak to the child from the position of that potential and really lift that up within them. Or let's say after recovery from a serious disease, your partner looks into your eyes saying, I am here because you believed in me, right? So that firm belief, like, wow, you held space for me while I was being in that tough phase of being sick. And it's because you believed in me, I survived. Again, this is a nice example of whether that's true or not, doesn't really matter, right? But you just got the feedback that you held space for your partner's potential to heal. Or, and this I love, maybe you know the movie Invictus. There's this really cool scene where Nelson Mandela, who is played by Morgan Freeman, asks the football coach, Francois, who was played by Matt Damon, exactly the questions he needs to hear so he can inspire the South African football team to win the World Cup, right? And I also want to share one more example, which maybe you've seen before looking at our social media, because we think one of the best examples from generative listening comes from the kids' book, Momo, who, makes people feel better just by listening to them. Here's one more time, a little picture of Morgan Freeman, but let's go to the incredible example. And I'm gonna, volume is already down. And here's a little excerpt that really tells its way. Momo could listen in such a way that worried people and indecisive people knew their own minds from one moment to the next, or shy people felt at ease, or downhearted people felt happy and hopeful. And if someone felt that his life had been an utter failure and that he himself was only one amongst millions of wholly unimportant people who could be replaced as easily as broken window panes, he would go and pour his heart to Momo. Touch was Momo's talent for listening. So I think this describes it super well, what this generative listening power can do. And Otto Scharmer came up with this really cool graphic about summarizing it. And he has these 4 things: listening from habits, which he calls downloading, which is really reconfirming old opinions and judgments. Listening from the outside, right? This is like, I'm trying to confirm or disconfirm the reality I'm taking in through my senses. That's factional listening. And we need an open mind for that to be good factual listeners. And listening level number 3 is, as you said, listening from within, empathic listening, where you want to have an open heart, and where you're really trying to see through the other person's eyes, and you have this emotional connection, right? Regardless of what facts they're telling you. And listening number 4, as he calls it, listening from source. Generative listening, where it's really asking the question from the future, what is wanting to emerge, right? And you're connecting to an emerging future whole shift in identity and self, right? These are big words. But basically, as I like to say, you're listening from the standpoint of that person's or the situation's potential. And for that, you need an open will to truly perceive potential wherever you're going. So finally, we come to the self-discovery exercise. And I want to throw in that there are really two exercises. The first one is just an experiment. And the experiment I'm going to invite you to join is to just, next time you're listening, try to listen to people from these different levels. Try to imagine, what level am I currently on? What level do I want to be on? And just try to play with that. That's the first experiment, short one. One we actually want to introduce to you is one where we're going to have a little self-diagnosis of what are my limits to each level of listening. And we're going to be starting with 2, 3, 4, obviously, because level number 1, the downloading, we don't strictly count as listening. What are my strengths and how can I improve on my desired level? So let's get right into it. Let's start with how to cultivate a more open mind. And here's some questions that will help you discover your limits. Number 1, are there any areas in which I or you get repeatedly entangled into debates? Right? Are there hard topics like being a vegan, or I don't know, who to vote for, or whether you should chew your muesli in this or that way? Where do you feel a strong need to be right? And what are limits to staying tolerant of certain opinions? Maybe you feel strongly about gender or strongly about race. Maybe you feel strongly about how your partner puts their toothbrush in the cup in the evening. And also let's think about what could be potential strengths that you have when it comes to factual listening. So what are the areas where you actually can listen in a non-triggered way and dare to be surprised? Where is it that you don't have to stick to your opinion? Where do you love to be curious? So curiosity is a wonderful indicator of an open mind. Next, how to cultivate a more open heart. How to practice empathic listening skills. And again, let's discover our limits first. Here's some questions to discover those. When facing anger, fear, or sadness, what needs to happen so that you become defensive, right? When do you put up your guard? When you start stonewalling? Which emotions have to be in the room? And then discovering your strength. How do you feel internally when you can completely empathize with somebody else? How do you feel? And that is probably the state from which you're going to be a pretty good empathic listener. Are there certain situations or emotional states in which you can sense others well? How are you a good empathic listener? How do you have an open heart? And this is really interesting, how to cultivate a more open will to perceive potential. And here it becomes pretty tricky. So what are potential limits here? How am I not walking the talk in my life? Which topics am I maybe expected to be giving advice on, but it's really more like reciting other people's opinion, right? So for instance, are you trying to give advice on losing weight, although maybe you really have never managed to do that, right? Or I love this one. Are you maybe trying to give advice on how to live good relationships, although you are maybe pretty unhappy in your relationship, right? This is going to feel kind of tough, and you're going to feel harder to connect to the potential of other people while being in that conversation with them. And I like to say, especially, these tend to be especially areas that we ourselves struggle in, but we really want to get it right, and when we're deep down in the tunnel, we often struggle to see the light at the end, right? And as a result of that, we're going to be finding it harder to pick up that potential in conversations with other people. Discovering my strengths, let's go for that. And I feel the most powerful question here is, what transformations have you gone through? And as a result of that, really understood an important value. And this value is likely something you can see in others and inspire, therefore, in others to follow. So imagine you're somebody who has already like scaled successfully their own business, and then you have like this little teenager who's like, but I have the dream to run my own business. And then you can actually credibly say, yeah, go for it, because that's what I did and it worked for me. And the reason what makes it effective, the thing that makes it effective, is that it is credible, because you have to cultivate this deep faith within you that it's possible. Now, you don't just have to experience something. For instance, you don't have to have been a drug addict and overcome that. And that's the only way you can inspire drug addicts to get rid of their addiction. Now, you don't have to go through this experience. But what I'm saying is, if you have gone through it, you're going to find it much easier to be credible when you're spotting that potential, that opportunity in situations or in conversation. So there is a homework once you have sort of diagnosed yourself, what are my limits and what are my potential strengths? And the idea is you really sense into yourself. And you just write down 3 breakthrough activities that help you cultivate a more open mind, a more open heart. Like, where do you have to heal? And a more open will to perceive potential, which is basically which beliefs about yourself and the world are truly empowering, and how can you foster them? How can you sort of choose your reality in a way that you find it easier to spot this kind of potential in conversations? And I want to say 2 tips for this. For now, let's just pick one. You know, it kind of seems really exhausting to work on all 3 levels at the same time. And the second tip is fake it till you become it. So you might be like, especially about cultivating a more open will to perceive potential, like, really? So I'm going to have to like manipulate myself into seeing potential where I really see none? And I want to say, yeah, yes. Because fake it till you become it. When we start to discover, to cultivate a sensitivity for potential, we're gonna see more of that popping up. And yes, our reality isn't static. It's definitely something we can shape. And maybe, let's say, rather than having Instagram advertisements or social media or whatever, like external stuff shape it, let's just choose to shape it by ourselves. That would be my second tip. With these words, we did compile a guide for you. If you want to read all of this stuff, if you want to do this with in a more peaceful, more calm setting, go for it. You can get the guide on our newsletter. So it's thearc.site/loveletter, or you just basically go to our blog, thearc.site/blog, and you can read up the full article there and download the full self-coaching guide. We have a lot more examples, especially when it comes to the self-coaching exercise. So if that's something you're curious about, you're so invited. And of course, you're still so invited if you're curious about really pushing the envelope when it comes to building impact that truly inspires you, to sign up for a coffee chat and chat to one of our team members about that and what's holding you back. And if the ARC can support you in your personal journey. Now, boom, you can always find us on social media, and we hoped you loved this topic as much as we did. There was a little dog snoring in the background. I don't know if you heard that. If you did, kudos to you. And I'm going to go out for lunch now and can't wait to see you soon again. Bye-bye.